All right. Hello and welcome. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming today. So, on this year's International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, we are joined today by Ms. Sarah Hendricks, UN Women's Director of the Program Policy and Intergovernmental Division, and Ms. Calliope Manjero, Chief of the Ending Violence Against Women section, here in the room. Online, we are joined by Candace Welsh, UNODC's Director of the Division for Policy Analysis and Public Affairs, and David Drosis of UNODC's Data Analytics and Divisions. So if I understand correctly, we will start with Candace Welsh. Please, you have the floor. If you can
Thank you very much. I believe there's a presentation. So I'm very pleased to be able to present a brief overview of the key findings in the latest report on global estimates of intimate partner and family-related femicides, which is jointly developed by UNODC and UN Women. These findings shed a light on critical issues that affect communities all around the world. Femicides include killings in the domestic sphere, that is either by an intimate partner or other family members, as well as killings that take place outside of the domestic sphere where there's a gender motivation, such as previous records of harassment or violence by the perpetrator. Unfortunately, those latter types of femicides, there's very little data that's available on that. And so this study focuses only on intimate partner and family-related femicides. Next, please. In 2024, an estimated 50,000 women and girls were killed by intimate partners or other family members. This number is worldwide. This means that 137 women and girls lost their lives every single day at the hand of someone in their own family. And sadly, what we see is that this global figure shows no sign of decline. Now, killing by intimate partners or other family members can be committed by both male and female perpetrators, including in such cases as honor killings or dowry-related murders. While we don't have global data on that, we do know that with recent estimates that approximately 90% of intentional homicides are committed by men. And this information is based on information we have directly from member states to UNODC that is complemented then as well by other information from governance sources and from NGOs. Next, please. So if we look worldwide, then we can see that there are gender-related killings in every single region of the world. Africa continues to be the region with the highest number of victims in absolute terms, where there were 22,600 victims last year. In the Americas, so you can see that's been followed by Asia at 17,400, then the Americas at 7,700, 2,100 in Europe, and just 300 in Oceania. But it's important to understand with these numbers what the actual rates of intimate partner or family violence, femicide are per 100,000. And here we see that Africa is still the highest at 3 per 100,000, followed by the Americas at 1.5, and then down from there across. It's important to recognize, though, of course, that these are very big regions, and so there may be, big differences within those at the country or sub-regional level. Next, please. When we try to look at long-term trends in femicide, so far we can only really look at two regions, in the Americas and Europe, where we have longer-term detailed data to be able to look at the changes over the last 14 years, from 2010 to 2024. And in these regions, we can see a difference. In the Americas, despite some fluctuations up and down, the rate in 2024 is not that much lower than what it was in 2010. In contrast, in Europe, we do see a more marked decline from 2010 into 2024. But it is clear that these kinds of meaningful changes only occur over extended time. Reflecting the risk factors and the causes behind this form of violence are deeply rooted in social norms and practices, and that changes, unfortunately, tend to occur gradually. Next, please. As we know worldwide, men and boys account for the vast majority of homicide victims, 80% across the world. And that's often, driven when we look at organized crime or gang-related violence or homicides that result from brawls or other kinds of physical violence. However, when we start to look at what violence happens in the home or by intimate partners, we see that almost 60% of the women that are killed by intimate partners or other family members. Whereas when we look at that figure for men, it's much, much smaller, and only 11% of them are happening in the home. So it's important to recognize this, that while the vast majority of male homicides occur outside this domestic sphere, unfortunately for women, the home continues to be the most dangerous place for them in terms of risks of a homicide. And I would like to finish here with these rather stark data that really drives home the importance of the issue and also the action that we continue to need to really take. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Welsh. And now moving into the room, Ms. Hendricks, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And indeed, this is actually the 26th year that the United Nations and member states commemorate the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. And across these decades, our latest data estimates confront us with a very stark truth. And that is that for these 2+ decades, the needle has actually barely moved. In fact, intimate partner violence has declined by just about 0.2% on an annual basis. The femicide estimates that were just presented by Candice actually deepen this truth. They show that for far, far too many women and girls, as Candice said, the most dangerous place is actually the home. The most dangerous place is actually in the home. One woman or girl is killed every 10 minutes by an intimate partner or by her family member. A data point that actually catches in my throat, even though we have seen this same refrain for many, many years now. Femicides do not emerge suddenly. They do not emerge out of the blue. They are actually the fatal final act in a continuum of violence. A continuum of violence that is visible, but that is often far too ignored long before a woman is killed. We've just emerged from the Trusteeship Council chambers where the commemoration of the International Day to End Violence Against Women was happening, and too many women and girls are simply not here on this day. And we owe them the honesty of the numbers that we're speaking about today. And so with that, we must confront also another uncomfortable truth, and that is that our data only tells us a partial story. And that's because too many systems still fail to actually record the depth and the breadth of femicides as what they are. When killings are logged without that intimate partner and perpetrator relationship, the victim-perpetrator relationship, they actually disappear from count. They don't appear in the data anymore. And in most countries, gender-related killings that actually take place outside the home are not measured at all. And this is not because they don't happen, but simply because the systems we have don't see it, don't count it. The estimates that we present here today by UNODC and by UN Women exist because we actually insist that they exist. But the absences in the data tell us something actually equally important. They show that where systems have not yet caught up with realities that women and girls are facing, that we need to pay the hardest focused on. And this is clearest in the digital space, where the links between technology-facilitated violence and lethal violence remain largely unmeasured, and consequently they remain largely unaddressed. Digital violence is not separate from real violence. It is the very same violence. It's the very same violence, just accelerated. The very same violence, but amplified. We see women surveyed online before they are attacked offline. We also see coerced images that spark lethal harm. And we see the killings of women and girls actually live streamed on platforms. These are the very same platforms that should protect them. Legislation has not kept pace. 1.78 billion women and girls worldwide are left with no legal protection from online harassment or from cyber stalking. That's nearly 2 billion women and girls who have no legal protection from online harassment or from stalking that takes place digitally. When women are pushed out of digital spaces, their right to participate in society, their right to speak, to be heard, to use their voices, all of this gets eroded. And with it, when those voices are eroded, when women become increasingly invisibilized, the democratic institutions that depend on those rights are likewise eroded. 1 in 4 journalists right now receives online threats, including threats to their lives. 1 in 4 journalists around the world, 4 female journalists. 1/4 to 1/3 of women parliamentarians face abuse severe enough to silence them, to have them deplatformed, to step back from political life. And amidst this, artificial intelligence is actually accelerating this harm. Deep fakes and targeted harassment is evolving faster and faster than the systems can actually keep pace. So what are the shifts that can change this trajectory? Across decades of evidence, we know that the presence of strong and autonomous and well-funded women's movements and women's rights organizations is the single most critical factor that can drive progress to actually end violence against women. We know that countries with domestic violence legislation actually report significantly lower rates of intimate partner violence, 9.5% compared to 16.1% of those countries without such laws. We've seen really promising steps towards progress this year. Laws that were strengthened in Belgium and in Colombia, new prevention initiatives in Panama, but also in Costa Rica, enhanced police responsiveness in Spain and in Pakistan, amongst many, many other countries. These shifts show that when governments act with intention, with decisiveness, with political will, that violence indeed can decline. And that's why this year's 16 days to end violence against women and girls is centered on ending digital violence, because digital safety is now foundational to women's safety, to women's rights, and to women's role in public life. At UN Women, we are working to shift this trajectory by advancing global norms and standards to ensure that there are enforceable national frameworks, by strengthening data and the data systems that collect data, by transforming digital ecosystems and social norms, and by supporting coordinated justice, including with the police sector, with social services, as well as with the technology sector, so that survivors can actually access timely help, can access safe and effective remedies. During these 16 days, we will launch some new tools, some new research, and new resources to support evidence-based legislation and policing. But we also know that tools will not be enough to change the numbers that you are hearing about today. Tools really only matter when political will gives them their force. And so when those choices are not made, the cost really is carried by the women and girls who should still be with us today. I think we honor the women and girls who aren't here, who have died because of femicide, by changing what the future looks like, what tomorrow looks like, by building systems where their safety is actually non-negotiable, by building systems where gender equality is actually understood as the foundation for justice and peace. And the pathway to that world, if we choose it, is one that we believe makes safety a reality for women and girls everywhere. With this, I thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We will open the floor now to questions, and all of our guests here, I'm sure, will be happy to answer. Dulcie, yes, go ahead.
Oh,
And then
thanks
Pam.
very much. What do you account for the slight decrease annually? Is it because you're keeping closer track? And what is the form of murder generally in the home? And what's your thoughts on President of the United States referring to a journalist as piggy? Does that encourage more violence against women, either in the home or outside? Thanks.
Our guests online,
Yeah.
either David? Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. So indeed, the figure is slightly lower than last year, but when we published those numbers on the global estimates of femicides, we have some uncertainty around these figures because we do not get data from all countries for all years. So this decrease is actually not really significant. It's still within what we call the interval of uncertainty. So we do not actually, or we cannot say there's a decrease, and that's mostly related to the fact that we have slightly different, we have different countries with data depending on the year. Regarding the form of murder occurring in the home, so most of the killings by intimate partners or family members in regions where we have sufficient data are actually committed by intimate partners. So in Europe, that's 64% of the killings are committed by intimate partners, and in the Americas, it's 69%.
Thank you, David. And Ms. Sarah?
Sure. On your third question, indeed, any time that a woman is conveyed in derogatory ways is unacceptable. And I think a reminder that no woman is safe from harassment. But I think this speaks to a much wider reality that women face usually when faced with remarks, whether on the streets, in their homes, in the workplace, wherever this takes place. And that is that violence can spark and can reinforce the perceptions of women, that women are less valued or that women are less worthy. This too, in terms of the social norms that underpin both femicide as well as online violence, needs to change.
Thank you. Pam and then Namo.
Thank you so much. Really interesting research and well done. It's Pamela Falk from U.S. News and World Report. Number one, if I understood correctly, the numbers on femicide have maintained around the same. And so my question is, with so much exposure to this in the last at least 5 years, with Me Too, with all this, why hasn't it gone down? And I know why is often a tough question for report writers, but the second is on the digital, what kind of tools are you introducing? And it seems inconceivable, but true, that these that what you said about if femicide can be broadcast live. I mean, isn't there a crackdown? Isn't there a ability to prosecute or at least call out some of these, any kind of website? Isn't it trackable to be able to stop it? So thank you.
Thank you so much. Ms. Minjera.
Thank you so much for your question, and it's really very pertinent. Why don't we really see this data changing? This is very important. I have to say that we have acknowledged some progress in laws, policies in many countries. For example, marital rape right now has been criminalized in many countries. So we see some progress around laws, policies, women's movements, raising awareness like the Me Too, Ni Una Menos, but awareness raising and campaigns are not enough. Laws are not enough. What we really need to have in place is first of all budgets, adequate resources, political will to enforce the legislation, and also we need to address impunity. And that's why the role of the police, law enforcement officials, the justice sector is really central to have the right capacity and the right information and tools in order to make sure that these cases are getting to court and they are getting justice, so to address impunity and to have a very clear message that violence against women and girls is not tolerated. And if I may add around, you asked a very good question around digital violence. What are the tools? What do we need to do in order to stop having digital violence? Sometimes such violent crimes, they're live streamed through the digital platforms. I have to say that very often we hear that women, they need to protect themselves. Women, they need to protect and make their account safe. There are tools for that. But it's very important that we don't have only women having the responsibility to protect themselves. It's very important that we're having regulation. We have the right legal frameworks in place that digital violence is getting criminalized, and at the same time offering to survivors protection and support, civil remedies as alternatives in order to address the harm they have been doing. And there I think it's very, very important, the responsibility and accountability that technology platforms, they need to have in order to stop such violence before it happens. So if we have the right content moderation, if we have the right accountability in place, the right reporting, how they monitor the bias that they are created, and how do they stop disinformation and misinformation and deep fakes already happening, and which reinforce such violence against women and girls, both in online and offline spaces.
Thank you. Would anybody like to add anything? Or otherwise we can go. Namo, please go ahead.
Thank you. Namo Abdullah with Ruda Media Network. Thank you for this timely and important presentation. I need one clarification, and I have two questions, if you allow me. I think both Candace and Sarah talked about this. One of you, I think, said the most dangerous place is home for women. Is home more dangerous for women than men, or is it actually more dangerous for women to be home than on the street? Can you please clarify that? And secondly, you talked about, of course, the negative role that AI and technologies have played in amplifying violence against women. Is there a possibility for AI to play a positive role as well, especially in data collection? And thirdly, over the past few years, we've seen a lot of controversy over the participation of trans women in women's sports. Some people view it as violence against women, especially in high-impact sports like boxing, where they retain biological trans women appear to retain, more power or body mass, for example, muscle mass. And where does any of you stand on this, or where does the United Nations stand on this? Do you consider trans women? Thank you.
Thank you, Namo. Starting with Mrs. Manjero.
So regarding if women are safer at home than in the streets, we have more data about safety at home and the violence they may face from their partners or other family members. And that's what we can count. We don't have enough data about their safety and sexual harassment that they face in public spaces, including in the streets, public transportation, But we have a lot of anecdotal information that the sexual harassment and violence that women face in the streets is really prevalent and very, very significant as well. And I think regarding the AI positive role, by all means, we have already a lot of advances of how the AI can be used for justice, for giving justice, for collecting digital forensic evidence, for example, for having AI chatbots in order to provide information to survivors on where they can find services. But in order to have these systems in place, we really need to make sure that women and girls, when they access these services, they feel safe and they don't have to face any violence.
And maybe I can just add a point around the home and also make a connection to the digital space. In fact, we do know that males and females are experiencing bullying online and hate speech. However, online abuse is unacceptable to everyone, but it is women who experience that abuse in far more sexualized and gendered ways, causing them to deplatform and or to face more specific sexualized attacks, and creating the conditions for the impact on their lives to be that much worse. We do see in our data that 90 to 95% of deep fakes across the world are actually of women, and specifically of sexual images of women. And so when we just look at the data in and of itself, well, men are more vulnerable to homicides that exist outside the home. Women are increasingly vulnerable to femicide that exists by an intimate partner or within the home, and also facing that connection with digital violence that has a continuum from online to offline realities. And I think the challenge here is how to make the digital space safer for everyone. In terms of your question around athletes, I think here we align really with the overall principle of non-discrimination and advocate essentially for all women and girls and every person that is born with the same human rights, really leveraging and reinforcing the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and its principles of non-discrimination. And upholding their rights is central, of course, to the mission of the United Nations. I think we remain steadfast to the vision of a world where the safety, the security, the access to rights, as well as the dignity of all people, regardless of identity, regardless of expression, are protected and indeed are fully realized.
Thank you.
Maybe if I could just come in on the data, if that's okay.
Yes, Candace, we were coming to you.
Thank you very
Please go
much.
ahead.
Yeah, to make the point, so, as we noted, with the homicides in general, more men are victims of a homicide in total. So we have 80% of victims worldwide are men, 20% are women. But the numbers, when we look down at where and why those homicides are happening, are very different when we're looking at the homicides of men versus the homicides of women. And that is, again, we have clear data that 60% of these women that are intentionally killed are killed by either their intimate partners or other family members. And that's why we talk about within the home. Now, there are 40% of those women that are killed outside the home. And as it was pointed out in the beginning, we don't have very clear data on which percentage of those 40% that are outside the home are killed because they're women, that their killing has some kind of gender dimension, as we were saying, whether it was previous harassment or other things. But this number is still stark, and it's that number that's been quite consistent over time. When we look at the fact that so many women, 60% are clearly, killed because of you know, a close family member, an intimate partner, and in the home. And that number is very different. It's very stark when we compare that to men, where it's only 11% of homicides that happen there, with almost 90% then of homicides happening outside for other reasons. And I think for that reason, it is important when we look at the responses, as been outlined earlier, we need to take that into account in terms of how we can best protect women and girls.
Thank you. Noreen, you have a question? Go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Noreen Hussain with IPS News. Just have two questions. My first is whether your teams are able to find any data to measure the correlation between technology-facilitated violence and femicide, as in cases where incidents of cyberstalking or releasing of coerced images or other online crimes culminated in a real-world crime. And second, and this is just to follow up on my colleagues' questions on digital violence and on regulations around that, how would you advise working with the social media companies and the tech companies to implement and better enforce regulations that would protect women and girls that use these spaces, particularly when a lot of these companies are in some ways incentivized with the continued engagement and with like the dissemination of a lot of posts, particularly incendiary posts, because they garner the most reactions and the most engagements. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Noreen, for your really insightful both questions. Indeed, as you've pointed to, online violence is not only online, it is indeed part of the same continuum that can end in femicide. Evidence is growing showing how violence in the online space, such as coercive control, but also surveillance through and stalking through digital means, may actually manifest in the offline space in various ways, including through physical violence and at the very worst, through lethal violence. There is research in the UK that shows that research on killings committed in the domestic sphere showed that 60% of the victims had been controlled or surveyed online before being killed. So 60% had some sort of experience of cyber stalking, essentially. Women with high levels of public visibility, as I said in my previous commentary, are experiencing death threats, and they experience, I think, an elevated risk of technology-facilitated violence. So that's 1 in 4 women journalists globally, and between 1 in 4 and 1 in 3 women in public life, but specifically parliamentarians, that data point refers to. However, we know that the connection between these two pieces needs to be better understood. And right now, there is an insufficiency in data systems to do that. And that is why UN Women and UNODC are addressing the intersections of technology-facilitated violence against women and girls and femicide. And so we do have guidance that is forthcoming for measuring just that, measuring technology-facilitated violence leading to gender-related killings. This will be a technical brief which aims to complement the statistical framework for measuring the gender-related killings of women and girls by actually introducing a methodological guidance that can identify and record the tech aspects of that, the digital component, the cyber surveillance or the cyber stalking aspects as part of that continuum of violence that connects to and leads to gender-related killings of women and girls. Your second question, I think I'll turn to my colleague and Chief of Ending Violence Against Women and Girls at UN Women to respond.
Thank you for your question. It's really important that there is strengthened collaboration across the tech platforms, the law enforcement sectors, for exchange of information and sometimes for stopping the abuse getting spread in tech platforms and making sure that the regulations already in place are enforced. We already have some significant pieces of legislation around the world, like the EU Digital Act, the Takedown Act here in the US, for example, where they have to oblige tech platforms to take the deep fakes and the non-consensually shared images, for example, down, because very often what survivors want is the harm to stop and the harmful content to be removed. It's very important that technology platforms, they do share promising practices across the different platforms to make sure that such regulations are enforced, and making sure as well that there is collaboration with women's rights organizations, with service providers, to provide the right support services for survivors when this harm happens.
Of course, yes, please.
You know, this has been a very data forward event and briefing. And so I'd like to bring another very critical data point into the room. This was advanced and communicated as part of the SDG Gender Snapshot report that UN Women produces on an annual basis with UNODC. And that is that a whole of government and a whole of society approach with comprehensive action to end violence against women actually makes a statistically significant difference to ending violence. And we have the evidence. The rates of intimate partner violence in countries that have invested into that comprehensive package have rates that are 2.5 percentage points lower than countries without that. And that includes working with the private sector, working with the digital producers and platforms. And it reinforces, I think, a really important point, which is this is a critical moment. The acceleration, especially of online violence, is at such a accelerated pace that the moment to act is now so that everyone can be protected. And governments really, as Calliope said, are beginning to modernize laws to match the realities of digital abuse. But this momentum must actually accelerate. We need to see not only every part of society jump in, but strong legal frameworks and global cooperation so that enforcement actually works across borders, and really that online safety becomes a legal standard and not a privilege for just some women and just some girls.
Thank you. David, did you want to come in or?
Yes, thank you. And I would like to add a bit to what my colleagues from UN Women were saying on the link between femicide and technology-facilitated violence against women and girls. For many countries, it's very difficult already to measure femicide, and that's why we're working with UN Women on the implementation of the statistical framework for measuring femicide. And really trying to then also link it to technology-facilitated violence against women and girls also really require a lot of efforts from criminal justice institutions. And that's why we are developing some technical guidelines on that issue. We also recently had the adoption of the cybercrime, the United Nations Convention Against Cybercrime, which is a victory for victims of online abuse, because it's the first treaty that recognizes the non-consensual dissemination of intimate images as an offense. It provides languages and legal framework for member states to integrate it in the national legislation, and we really hope that it will also lead to progress. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions in the room or online? If not, then I'd like to thank our guests here in the room and online from UN Women and UNODC. And I'd like to remind everybody that at 2 p.m. also on the same subject, the President of the General Assembly will also be here to brief journalists. And if you would like to share with us later your presentation and your remarks, your briefing in the beginning, then we can share them with journalists.
Press as well. Yeah.
Thank
Thank you so much, Ms. Thank you.
The femicide report is available online on both UN Women as well as UNODC sites, and we'd be happy to follow up to ensure that you have access to that. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.